but they do it in their own school meetings. So that's an example of how do you ingrain that? And what we found is that's the kinds of things that we talk the most about now in Frank McKinley. We don't jump into a new math program just simply because we had a publisher show up. We really research it. Does this fit into what we need to do? And it was a very difficult transition the last 7 years to do that because we were under the gun. We were a program improvement district. We were not happy with our scores. And a lot of pressure for a quick fix. But the schools in our district that for the first time ever became 800 API schools, when you look at those schools compared to the other schools that are just inching along, those are the schools with the strongest teacher effective culture. Teachers have a sense of collegiality. They know how to collaborate. They work in teams. And the schools that are still struggling are working on that. And now, our number one need and focus is to help those schools that haven't developed that culture develop it and not come in with a new reading and math program.
Mm-hmm. So as you're talking, I'm thinking about that you're developing this culture and you're mentioning API, and now we know API is becoming irrelevant. We've got this new set of Common Core standards, and they're just way up here. And I'm even thinking about KIPP and Rocket Ship. So if it's true that culture really matters, they've been incredible at driving test scores. Mm-hmm. Are they now going to be able to do what Eduardo talked about, which is help people not only, and what Dr. Treisman's slide showed, which is not just help people master material, but apply it to the real world, right? That's the new challenge. And we know KIPP, they've gotten a lot of press for working really hard on this. They're beginning to think of, they've been thinking about it for quite some time. But we now have this kind of experiment going on of how are people going to adapt and how are they going to make the transition. And I want to turn to you, Linda, because your program, Agile Minds and Academic Youth Development, is helping kind of develop this academic mindset piece of the work. So do you want to describe that and describe how you're partnering with schools and districts? You have a lot of products. The one we're kind of wanting to highlight today is Academic Youth Development, which I know underlies much of what you do. So maybe you can help us get our head around it. And
this was a program designed by our colleagues at the Dana Center in concert with leading psychologists to take some of the powerful research that Eduardo has highlighted by Carol Dweck and others, and to put it to the service of students who are going from lower order mathematics into higher order mathematics. So the problem we began by seeking to address is, what is the journey from middle school to high school? What is the journey from middle school math to algebra? And part of what was most motivating to us was research from the National Math Panel, in which almost 65% of algebra teachers, when asked the biggest problem they faced, didn't say lack of skill, lack of preparation. They said lack of motivation. So we built a program that now exists in several forms. A summer boot camp to prepare students for algebra, an advisory program in school year, and we found our most recent program is one for the adults. This built out of some of the early successes we had in academic youth development. The program begins with an introduction to the malleability of intelligence, to what happens to your brain when you learn. It moves to questions of, what is effective effort? What does it look like, and how do we know? What is productive versus unproductive persistence? What does self-efficacy mean to me as a learner? Rather than focusing on the psychological research and strategies, we put those to work in the curriculum on beginning problems that a fifth grader could solve and moving up to problems that virtually every teacher who enacts the program says, wonderful, my kids can't do it. So by the end of the program, students have gone and put the psychological repertoire to work on problems that build their confidence, that can be solved in a couple of minutes, to at the end, a culminating problem in forensic science that takes 2 full days and collaboration. At the end of the program, we were prepared for what was going to happen to the students. One was, they didn't actually see how this could be math. It dramatically increased their success rates in algebra. But when asked later, they didn't see the mathiness. They thought they were problem solving. We were prepared for that, and we've worked, we've designed, we've enhanced. This will be a long journey we'll be undertaking to optimize this so that it's powerful for mathematics, for science, for what we believe are the new invitations of the Common Core in English language arts. Very powerful, very inspiring. But the big shock for us was the effect it had on the adults who enacted the program. And a psychologist at Stanford said, this is one of the most powerful examples of misdirection I have ever seen in an intervention. Now, I thought he might be accusing us of trickery, which of course we would rather not engage in. And I said, tell me what that means. And he said, you tell these adults that they're saving the kids from a really significant failure rate in algebra. And at the end, what you do is save the adults as well. So to give you an example of a kind of remark that is made again and again and again at the end of the program by teachers, to turn to the deficit look, which we don't really like, some teachers in tears say, I have been underestimating the capabilities of my students. And remember, our work is fundamentally at Agile Mind with students of poverty. I've been underestimating my students for the last 10 years, and I don't ever want to do it again. But on the positive, asset-based side, I wrote this down because it has been so meaningful to us on the tough days, as all of us face in this work. Teacher after teacher said, this restores for me the spirit and purpose of why I became an educator in the first place. I had lost that, and you've given it back to me. So I think when John speaks about the work, you're going to hear from Mike, you've heard from Eduardo and Uri, working on the adults at the same time that we work on those they serve is what is particularly powerful here. Because candidly, if students believe that their intelligence is malleable, if students believe that with effective effort they can have a different future, but they face adult after adult who says politely, you, not so much, that wonderful experience won't be sustained for them.
Thank you. So building on this now, I want to let Mike get into the conversation. And I was thinking, one of the things about Phoenix Academy and Spire Schools and others is that you get to be a little more selective about the teachers that you hire. And I'm wondering how you think about, as you're hiring teachers, what is going to be required of those adults and how you're getting them ready. So they come in, they may have slight more motivation, they may be more culturally attuned to your environment. I'm not sure if they're bringing all the skills they need to bring. And so I'm wondering, how are you thinking about developing their skills to get them ready to teach this more complex in this more complex kind of environment where the new Common Core standards are going to be holding them accountable to the kinds of problems that Uri put up earlier. And they themselves may struggle even to think through those problems as they're teaching kids.
Given the data and the studies that show that teachers are the lever that's making the difference, that is the most important question, and we try to, I think a lot of my answer would be reiterating some of the things that we've heard this morning. I think setting up structures that create, and including rituals and systems that create a sense of belonging and a sense of connection, that helps fundamentally with the motivation piece. To get back to the first part of your question, we are hiring folks who, they don't generally come in with those skills or that experience. And I think what we look towards is the cultural fit in terms of that motivation, that passion, that capacity for learning and the desire to learn. And I think looking at adults as learners from the teacher level to the system-wide leader level, I think is really critical if we're going to be successful as we start looking at making kids successful, not just on a very baseline metric, which we're not doing that great a job of making this kid successful on that really bare bones metric to begin with. So I think setting up structures that belong, that create a sense of belonging and purpose. I think layering onto that culture shared vocabulary and language, that's really critical so that we understand the shared expectations for ourselves. And I also think that metrics that matter, collecting data that matters. I think the word accountability is really important, and it needs to imply positive things, not just the bubble test. Accountability means understanding what are the outcomes that you have in mind, creating assessments that matter so that you can hold yourself up to the light and measure your progress along the way. And ideally, you're doing that in a formative way and not in a summative way. So I think one of the things that Aspire has done is create a rubric to evaluate instructors, to articulate, and it's a product of our values. So there are domains that you can look at in discrete ways and break it down into its component parts. But it's all reflective of that culture, which I think aligns a lot with what Dr. Porter is talking about and Franklin McKinley. We have different words and different vocabulary words. The semantics might be a little different, but I think the thrust culturally is what we're talking about. But Aspire's instructional rubric is organized into 5 domains. So there's data-driven planning and instruction. There's classroom environment. There's the actual instruction itself. There's what we call professional responsibilities, which has to do with collegial relationships and participating as a team member and a professional. And then there's community connections beyond the school site or beyond the school system. What I think is really important is that we're able to have teachers look at themselves as self-directed learners. That on some level we are trying to coach teachers in a particular direction to develop them along this rubric. But I think the most powerful development that occurs is when a teacher looks at and reflects on their own practice and their own beliefs and sets goals for themselves and then uses this rubric as a tool to measure themselves along the way and has their peers, their school leaders, and their students actually help guide them to try to understand where they are and where they need improvement. And I think that within that framework, that's teeing them up for success. Mm-hmm. So they don't necessarily need to come in with a world of experience. And in some cases, that experience has contributed to beliefs about their students or stereotypes is a really charged word. But let's be honest, it's stereotypes, right? Beliefs about what their students can and can't do, and their capacity, and beliefs about themselves. So sometimes I think that the raw material itself, that the tabula rasa might be a little bit...
So you're saying that in some ways the conditions that are set by the leaders in your schools can even overcome some of the adult readiness factors to get there. They don't necessarily have to be superstars when they arrive.
If you start with cultural alignment as your primary focus, then yes, I think that's...
Dr. Porter, I'm curious, since you have a captive audience of teachers that you've inherited and have to bring along in this work, and there's huge challenges with that when you talk about the culture. Now we're getting into the role of both district leaders and principals. And so as you think about this culture piece, what do you want to add to that in terms of dealing with the non-public charter schools